13-year-old Dean Scheinman, was suddenly arrested during a police drug raid. Officers began questioning him about the drugs they found. Dean didn't hesitate. In his fear and desperation, he pointed to his mother, Tamara. She was the one who got him involved. But the system didn't see Dean as a victim. No one asked why a child was caught in the middle of a drug bust. The officers didn't see a scared boy, they saw a criminal. And just like that, Dean was taken into custody and pushed into the juvenile detention system. Dean expected someone to step in, to say this was all a mistake. But no one did. He was sent to a juvenile detention center, a grim, prison-like place where kids were locked up behind steel doors. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like punishment. Inside the detention center, the reality was far worse than Dean had imagined. The rules weren't set by the adults in charge. They were made and enforced by the other kids. The strongest, the scariest, and the most violent ones ran the place. Freddie was one of those kids. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always angry, Freddie had a reputation for violence and manipulation. He noticed Dean right away. To Freddie, new kids were easy targets. Dean felt lost, trapped, and alone. He had no friends, no one to protect him, and no idea how to survive. But his mind offered an escape. At night, Dean imagined a future version of himself. A grown-up who had made it through the nightmare, who stood on stage under the name Daniel Chen, telling jokes and making people laugh. Comedy became Dean's way of coping. He pictured himself using humor to make sense of his pain, to find control in a world that had taken everything from him. But even as an adult, Daniel performed to cheering crowds. A shadow lingered. One night he received a message, short, cryptic, and threatening. It was from someone tied to his past. Suddenly, the life he had built as a comedian started to tremble. Back in the detention center, Dean was barely surviving. Then the warden, Helly, called him in. Warden Helly was cold and calculating. She offered Dean a deal. If he agreed to inform the other inmates, spy on them, report their secrets, she'd help him get out early. It sounded like a way out. But it also meant betraying the few people who might care about him. Dean didn't know what to do. If he said no, he risked staying in the detention center much longer and possibly becoming a target. If he said yes, he'd be a snitch. No one trusted snitches. Dean met Zion Zoro. Zoro was different. He didn't talk much, but he carried a quiet power. Everyone was afraid of him. There were rumors he had killed a girl. But Zoro didn't act like a monster. He sat alone. He drew pictures. He avoided fights. Something about Zoro felt real. Dean found himself drawn to him. Over time, they developed an unspoken bond more like brothers than friends. In a place where everyone wore masks, Zoro was someone Dean could trust. As adult Daniel, Dean tried to ignore the message from his past. He told himself it was nothing. He buried it under work, under comedy. But it gnawed at him. On stage, his jokes began to change. They were still funny, but darker. The audience laughed, but sometimes nervously. Daniel was still performing, but now it seemed like he was also trying to confess. Back in the past, Dean grew more curious about Zoro. He wanted to know the truth. Had Zoro really killed someone? Or was he just another victim like Dean? Dean started asking questions. What he discovered shocked him. Zoro was from Ethiopia. He had grown up in a tough neighborhood and had always been treated as an outsider. When the murder happened, people were quick to blame him. No evidence, just assumptions. Because of his background, his silence, and his skin color, Zoro became the perfect scapegoat. Dean was furious. He realized the system wasn't just about punishment. It was built on prejudice. It didn't care about the truth. It wanted someone to blame, and Zoro fit the bill. For a moment, things looked up. Dean and other inmates were taken to a rehabilitation farm, an open place with fresh air, animals, and real food. It gave Dean a glimpse of a better world. But the hope didn't last. When Dean trusted the wrong person, that trust was used against him. It felt like every time he reached for something good, it was snatched away. Dean's friendship with Zoro grew deeper. But so did the danger, Freddie noticed. He didn't like how close Dean and Zoro had become. He wanted Dean to choose sides. Freddie gave Dean a warning: prove your loyalty or suffer the consequences. Dean was trapped again. Betray Zoro or face Freddie's wrath, but things weren't simple anymore. New evidence about Zoro's case surfaced. It showed a different picture. The crime wasn't just about violence, it was about fear, survival, and the silence forced on young boys who had no one to protect them. Dean's world tilted. Nothing was black and white anymore. In the present, Daniel tried to keep going. He booked shows, wrote new material, and smiled for the cameras. But his performances felt hollow. He wasn't fooling anyone anymore, least of all himself. The threatening messages kept coming. Someone out there knew everything, and they weren't going to let it stay buried. Eventually, Dean made his choice. It was the hardest decision of his life. The fallout came fast. Other inmates turned against him. Guards began to treat him even worse. He had no friends left, except Zoro. Warden Helly increased the pressure. She didn't want justice. She wanted power. Dean realized he wasn't just a prisoner. He was a pawn in her game. In the present, Daniel's career started to crumble. He lost gigs. People whispered behind his back. Something from his past was leaking into the public eye. Every joke he told felt like a lie. One night, a fight broke out in the detention center. It was brutal. Dean barely survived. That moment broke something inside him. He wasn't the same boy anymore. He wasn't even sure who he was. Afterward, Zoro finally opened up. He told Dean about his life, how he was abandoned by his family, misunderstood by everyone, and blamed for things he didn't do. His story wasn't about crime. It was about being invisible. Meanwhile, adult Daniel went searching for the person behind the messages. He thought finding them would bring peace. But instead, he found more questions, more pain, more things he hadn't dealt with. Past and present began to blur. Daniel realized he had never really escaped. He had only been running. Dean's sentence was nearly over. He could taste freedom. But just before release, one last choice stood in his way. Freddy was planning something. He wanted Dean involved, or else. Dean had to decide: betray Zoro to save himself, or risk everything for the only friend he had. At the same time, Daniel's secret was exposed. People found out about his past. The media swarmed. Fans vanished. He was no longer the funny guy with a dark edge. He was a mystery no one could trust. Finally, the truth came out. Zoro hadn't killed the girl. She had died in an accident, and the blame had landed on the easiest target. Dean had known parts of the story, but now he saw it all. He also saw his own guilt. There were times he had stayed silent, times he had chosen survival over justice. He had been a victim, but he had also played along. In the end, Dean was released, but he wasn't free. The past had left scars. The center had changed him. In the final episode, Daniel steps onto the stage again, but this time he doesn't tell jokes. He tells the truth. He talks about Dean, the scared boy inside the detention center. He talks about Zoro and Freddy and the system that broke so many lives. It's not funny. It's raw, emotional, and honest. And the crowd listens. Daniel's voice shakes, but he doesn't stop. For the first time, he isn't trying to escape. He's trying to heal. It's not a happy ending, but it's real. And sometimes that's enough. Series review. Bad Boy is a bold, emotionally charged Israeli drama that refuses to sanitize the harsh realities of juvenile incarceration. Created by Ron Lesham, Hagar Ben Asher, and Daniel Chen, who also plays the adult version of the main character. The series stands out as a raw, semi-autobiographical exploration of trauma, friendship, and the search for identity after institutionalization. At the center is Dean Scheinman, portrayed with startling vulnerability by Guy Manster, in his youth and with restrained intensity by Daniel Chen as an adult. The series weaves between timelines: Dean's brutal teenage years inside a juvenile detention, center and his present-day career as a stand-up comedian who masks trauma with wit. This dual narrative structure is not just a stylistic choice. It's the thematic backbone of the show. The past and present don't run parallel. They collide, revealing how unprocessed trauma can seep into every facet of adult life. A standout element is the relationship between Dean and Zion Zoro, played with haunting quietness by Hafta Mofarda. Their bond is complex, often wordless but deeply human. Zoro becomes the series' most tragic and magnetic figure, a young man painted as a monster by the system, but revealed to be a victim of racial bias, neglect, and survival instincts. While the emotional and social commentary is gripping, the show isn't flawless. The adult timeline, particularly Dean's stand-up comedy segments, occasionally struggles with tonal dissonance, oscillating between biting commentary and narrative distraction. Some viewers may find that the balance between past and present sometimes tips unevenly, with the juvenile arc consistently stronger and more focused. Still, Bad Boy is an unforgettable viewing experience. It confronts difficult truths about youth incarceration, race, guilt, and the illusion of escape. It's not about neat resolutions or inspiring redemption arcs. It's about reckoning with wounds that never fully close, and the ways we try, often clumsily, to live despite them. Final verdict. Bad Boy is bruising, brave television. Its uneven structure doesn't dim its emotional power. For those drawn to character-driven dramas that are unafraid to sit with discomfort, this is essential viewing. Rating 4/5 stars. Raw, resonant, and deeply affecting, even when structurally uneven.